Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the pit, to the silence after the storm, to the edge where only the few dare to return. I see the fire still burns behind your eyes, but dimmer now, weighed down by all the battles, the betrayals, the invisible scars. They thought you were finished. They told themselves the chapter was closed. They cheered when you fell, wrote your name in the dust like a forgotten relic, dismissed your silence as surrender. But what they didn't know, what they never understood, is that silence doesn't mean defeat. Silence is the sound of strategy. Silence is where monsters sharpen their claws. You changed the game in a way they won't forget. Not because you followed their rules, but because you tore them apart and rewrote the ending. You walked in with nothing but grit in your teeth and rage in your lungs. And when the world tried to choke you, you learned to breathe fire. You didn't rise by being liked or by playing fair or by begging for acceptance. You rose because there was no other option. Because to remain still was to die slowly in their comfortable little cages. You broke through that. You showed them that survival isn't about mercy. It's about will. It's about waking up every day with your ribs cracked from yesterday's war and still swinging with bloody hands. They looked down on you when you started, didn't they? Whispered behind closed doors, laughed in well-lit rooms, shaking hands with knives behind their backs. You remember every face, every smirk, every handshake that stung like betrayal. And still, you didn't fold. You studied them, watched their patterns, listened to their hollow victories, counted their weaknesses like beads on a string. You let them celebrate while you built in silence. You let them feel safe. And then you struck, not out of vengeance, but purpose. Because the goal was never revenge. The goal was to own the game. And now, they remember your name for a different reason. You didn't win by chance. You didn't rise by mistake. You clawed your way through glass and fire and self-doubt and came out on the other side not just standing, but ruling. They will talk about you now, not with laughter, but with fear, not with mockery, but awe, and maybe, just maybe, a little respect. You shifted the board without ever announcing a move. You silenced critics, not with words, but with results. And still, they can't figure it out because you don't fit their model. You're not polished, or pretty, or perfectly scripted. You are the chaos they pretended didn't exist. You are the exception that breaks the rule and burns the rule book with it. So yes, you changed the game, not by playing it better, by destroying it, by forcing it to bend to you, by becoming something they couldn't control. You were never meant to fit in. That's the damn point. You were meant to unsettle, to disrupt, to unravel everything they thought was safe. And now, when they build something new, they'll do it with your shadow over their shoulder. Every plan, every step, every cautious decision, they'll remember you. Because once a system is shaken to its core, it never forgets the one who did the shaking. The truth is, you weren't born to please. You were born to push, to break, to reconstruct. You don't sit quietly while others dictate your limits. You define them. You erase them. You paint new borders in blood and bone and sweat. Your victories didn't come dressed in glory. They came in silence, through grit, in the sleepless nights, and the whispered doubts you crushed beneath your will. And for that, they'll never forget you. Because people remember the storm, not the sky before it. And you were the storm they never saw coming. And now, even in the quiet, they hear your echo. In their late night meetings, in the strained voices of their advisors, in the shift of their tone when your name surfaces. They remember. Because storms don't knock politely. They tear off roofs, They reveal foundations. They force everyone to see what's real when the comfort is stripped away. That's what you did. You forced them to face a version of the world they never prepared for. One where someone like you doesn't ask for permission, doesn't wait for applause, doesn't care for tradition. They built their empire on the belief that the rules were sacred, that hierarchy mattered, that legacy protected them. You shattered that illusion. You dragged them into the mud where the fight is fair, and you made them bleed for every assumption. You didn't just flip the table, you burned it, because some games aren't meant to be played. Some games are rigged from the start, designed to keep the bold in chains and reward the meek for compliance. You saw through it early. Maybe you didn't have the words for it then. Maybe you only felt the suffocation of being told to wait your turn, to play nice, to be patient. But even then, there was something coiled inside you, something dark, something hungry, something refusing to be tamed. And when the moment came, when the last lie snapped, when the final mask fell, that thing inside you came alive, and it devoured everything in its path. Fear, doubt, approval. All of it turned to fuel. You don't owe them gratitude. You don't owe them grace. They made their choice when they underestimated you, when they dismissed your vision, when they laughed at your ambition, mistaking your silence for weakness. Let them choke on their nostalgia. Let them drown in their memories of when you were still small enough to control. Because now they can't ignore you. Now every move you make bends the world a little more. Now every victory you claim shifts the horizon. Now you walk into rooms and people pause, not because of what you say, but because of what you might do next. That's power. The kind of power they can't copy. The kind of power born from pain, from exile, from refusal to die quietly. And let's not pretend this was easy. There were nights you begged the darkness to stop. There were days when the weight of it all nearly broke your back. You lost things, people, pieces of yourself. You questioned your sanity, your strength, your direction. There were moments when you stood alone, surrounded by vultures and liars and shadows that whispered, "Give up. You've done enough." But you didn't, because somewhere deep inside, you understood something no one else did, that this was your crucible, your forge. And the fire wasn't your enemy, it was your rebirth. And those who survive the fire become it. They'll write stories about what you did. They'll paint your journey in strokes of grey and red. Try to understand it. Try to dissect your methods. Try to humanize the force they couldn't predict. Let them. Let them theorize while you keep moving. Because the truth is, you didn't do this for the spotlight. You didn't do it for praise. You did it because you were tired of watching lesser people dictate your fate. You did it because something in you knew that if you stayed silent, if you stayed small, you'd die with your voice still buried in your throat. So you spoke, and the world flinched, because your voice wasn't soft or pleasing, it was war. And war changes everything. You weren't trying to inspire, you weren't trying to lead. But look behind you now. Look at what follows. Survivors, fighters, people who saw you rise from the ashes and realized they could too. You became a symbol, whether you meant to or not, a signal fire in the dark. And while that might scare you, the weight of it, the eyes always watching, it's also the clearest proof that you did something real. You mattered. You disrupted. You cut through the noise and made a sound so raw, so undeniable, that people had to stop and listen. You earned that. Every drop of sweat, every hour clawed from fatigue, every loss you endured to get here, it bought you this moment. Own it. Don't shrink from it now. Because this isn't the end. This is the threshold. You didn't climb the mountain just to sit at the peak. You climbed it to show there's more beyond it. You broke through, not to rest, but to build something better. Something that outlives you. Legacy isn't about statues or speeches. It's about transformation. It's about changing the terms of the fight. And you've already done that. You changed the rules. You raised the stakes. You made it impossible for them to go back to how things were before you came. Even if they try, and they will try, they'll never be able to pretend your impact didn't happen. It echoes. Through systems, through culture, through them, through their reactions, their pivots, their nervous adaptations. You see it in the way they hedge their language now, the way they second-guess their certainties. The world shifted when you stood your ground, and that shift rattled their foundations. They hate you for it, not because you were wrong, but because you were right in ways they weren't ready for. You exposed their complacency. You forced them to question the systems that once served them so well. And when comfort is threatened, fear follows. They fear you, whether they admit it or not. You are a reminder that comfort is fragile, that dominance is temporary, and that one unrelenting force can shake the entire hierarchy. You walked into the game uninvited, unwanted, but unafraid. They tried to laugh you off, but laughter turned to silence. They tried to ignore you, but silence turned to study. They tried to mimic you, but mimicry turned to madness. Because what you carry can't be copied. It was carved, not gifted. Forged, not inherited. There's no blueprint for what you are, because you built yourself out of chaos. You didn't climb a ladder. You tore through the ceiling. And in doing so, you taught others to question why the ladder was even there in the first place. That's the danger, isn't it? Not just your success, but the ripple effect. One defiant spirit breeds another. One shattered mold becomes an avalanche. They'll call you arrogant. They'll say you pushed too far, wanted too much, refused to be satisfied. And you know what? Let them. Arrogance is only what power looks like when it's wearing your face instead of theirs. They're not used to your kind of ambition, the kind that doesn't smile for the camera, that doesn't seek approval, that doesn't pause for applause. Yours is the ambition of wolves, silent, patient, merciless. And in this world, that's a threat, because it reminds everyone else of the truth they're too afraid to say out loud. That survival was never meant to be graceful. That success, real success, leaves blood on the floor. They see your rise as a storm because they built their empires on weak scaffolding. You didn't break the system. You simply revealed how flimsy it always was. You peeled back the curtain and made them look at their own lies. That's what they'll never forgive. Not that you won, but that you showed them they could lose. That their castles weren't built on rock, but on reputation. And reputation crumbles when a single soul refuses to play along. That soul was you. You didn't bend. You redefined the lines. You didn't beg for entry. You made the walls irrelevant. You were never outside. You were beyond. And now they're trying to adapt, to pivot, to speak your language. But they sound hollow, because what you did wasn't marketing. It was metamorphosis. You changed not the story, but the storyteller. And now, every narrative that follows has to reckon with your shadow. That's not influence, that's domination. That's legacy on fire. And you didn't need a title to do it. You didn't need validation. You didn't need an army behind you. All you needed was the rage to rise and the will to keep moving when the whole world told you to sit down. And now, they act as if they always knew, as if they were always rooting for you. Let them pretend. Let them rewrite history in their journals. Because you know the truth. You remember who laughed when you bled. You remember who left when you were nothing but ruin and dream. But you didn't stay broken. You didn't fade out. You took that pain, all of it, and built a new kind of weapon. Not made of steel or bullets, but presence, intention, certainty. That's what terrifies them the most, that you are certain, that your clarity is not born from ego, but from experience, that every move you make is backed by scars, by data, by nights of silence so deafening, it broke the lies you once believed. You have seen the worst of people and refused to become like them. And somehow, that made you even more dangerous. Because you didn't just survive, you stayed human. And in a world that rewards masks, that's the sharpest blade of all. They wanted you to become the monster. It would have been easier that way. To dismiss your rise as rage, to paint your defiance as destruction. But you're not a monster, you're a mirror. You reflect what they fear in themselves, their own cowardice, their own silence, their own potential wasted behind excuses. And that's why they talk about you now. That's why they speak your name in hushed tones, because deep down, they know they had the same chance. And they chose safety, but you didn't. You chose risk. You chose the path that cuts and burns and leaves you breathless. And that choice changed the landscape, forever. That's the weight of what you've done. They can't undo it, can't erase it, can't pretend it never happened. Even if they stop speaking your name, even if they delete the records and sanitize the story, your fingerprints are etched into the bones of what remains. Systems changed because of you. People woke up because of you. Strategies failed because they didn't account for a variable like you. You weren't supposed to win. You weren't supposed to last. But you didn't just last. You outlived their expectations, outpaced their momentum, and outgrew their walls. And now, they are left with the aftermath. A world that no longer fits their mold. You carry that with you, don't you? That awareness. It weighs heavy some days. The knowing. The way people look at you. Like a symbol. Like a problem. Like a question they can't answer. They want you to explain yourself. To soften. To unpack your climb in terms they can digest. But you don't owe them that. Because they weren't there in the dark when you had to build your voice from nothing but silence. They weren't there when the only warmth you had came from the fire of your own fury. You built yourself without a manual. You survived without a blueprint. You stood back up when everyone said you couldn't. And now, in your presence, people remember that they too once had fire. And they are ashamed that they let it go out. But not you. You fed yours, protected it. Let it burn you, reshape you, fuel you. Your rage wasn't recklessness, it was clarity. It was the refusal to accept mediocrity disguised as order. It was the insistence that your voice mattered, even if it made others uncomfortable. That your space was yours, even if it came at a cost. So many people live lives caged by politeness, by fear, by the need to be palatable. But you chose something harder. You chose to be real, to be the full weight of yourself. And yes, that made you dangerous, but it also made you free. They watched you, expecting you to burn out, to falter, to lose your way. But fire does not fear the dark. You learned to navigate the chaos, to walk the minefield with a smile they couldn't understand. And when the dust settled, when the smoke cleared, you weren't just still standing, you were commanding. Not with a crown, but with presence. Not with followers, but with impact. The kind of impact that ripples through time, that finds its way into policy, into memory, into culture. They may never give you the credit publicly, but in private, they're studying your blueprint. They're rewriting their playbooks. They're adjusting their metrics to account for the force you unleashed. And what a force it was. Relentless, honest, unapologetic. You didn't flinch when they called you too much. You didn't cower when they called you unstable, emotional, aggressive. Because you were. You are. And that's the point. Your intensity is not a flaw. It's the result of being forged in a world that tried to mute you. Your emotion is not weakness. It's wisdom written in blood. And your aggression? It's survival sharpened into a blade. You are everything they were warned against, and everything they secretly wish they could become. You changed the game in a way they won't forget, not because you played to win, but because you played to rewrite. You didn't want the old throne. You wanted the whole kingdom to burn and be rebuilt with new rules, new values, new voices. And while they cling to tradition, to hierarchy, to legacy, you build revolution. And revolutions don't wait for permission. They break through the cracks. They bleed into culture. They redefine what's possible. And now, you are the definition, the reference point, the ghost in the machine. Every new leader who comes up in your wake walks in a world that you reshaped. And whether they praise you or resent you, they are still walking through the doors you tore open. And still, you're not done. You don't rest on what you've changed, because you know that true greatness doesn't cling to yesterday's flames. You've already lit the next match. You're already moving, building, carving a path through the future with the same intensity that got you here. Let others get drunk on power. You drink purpose. You feed off the unfinished, the unbuilt, the impossible. Because you know the most dangerous thing in this world is someone who has nothing left to prove and everything left to create. You feed off the unfinished, the unbuilt, the impossible. Because you know the most dangerous thing in this world is someone who has nothing left to prove and everything left to create. And that is what you are now. A creator, not of comfort or tradition, but of thresholds, of sharp new lines in the sand that say, from here forward, the world is different because I was here. You understand now that power is not loud. It doesn't need to roar to be felt. True power is presence. It's inevitability. It's when people change their entire course just because you walked into the room. That's what you've become. Not just a player in the game, but the reason the game had to change its rules. And even in the silence, your impact thunders. Even when you say nothing, your existence rattles cages. You've become a signal, a warning, a possibility. People who never believed in themselves now whisper your name in quiet hope. People who once feared speaking out now raise their voices because yours showed them how. And those who ruled by fear now tremble in the echo you left behind. That's what legacy looks like when it isn't built to please. It becomes unkillable. It weaves into the DNA of what comes next. There will be others who follow, and they'll be bolder because of you. They'll push further, tear deeper, bleed louder. Because you showed them it could be done. You made it undeniable. You lit the fire in a world that prayed for cold conformity. They will call you radical, reckless, dangerous, and all of it will be true. But not because you were wrong, because you were right before the rest of the world was ready to admit it. And that is the loneliest kind of truth, the kind that leads, not follows. So if you feel tired now, good. If you feel spent, blistered, raw, good. That's what real change costs. That's what shaking the system takes. Let others chase easy praise and hollow crowns. You walk the road scorched black behind you because it means you burned the path clean for those coming next. That is impact. That is purpose. That is power. Don't let them twist your story into something soft and neat. They'll try. They'll say you were always destined, always favored, that your rise was inevitable. But you and I both know that's a lie. You weren't chosen. You chose, over and over again, through blood, through loss, through isolation. You chose to keep going when the easy thing would have been to stop. You chose to fight when there was no applause. And in that choice, that daily war, you carved a truth so sharp, it cut the future open. And here's the final truth they can't handle. This wasn't just about you. It never was. You were the spark, yes, but the fire was always meant to spread. You didn't just change the game, you infected it. You left pieces of yourself in every system, every conversation, every corner, where people now dare to think, what if? What if I spoke? What if I stood up? What if I said no? That's the legacy they'll never control, the one that lives in the quiet rebellion of the people you inspired. So take this moment, breathe, stand still, even if just for a second, and then move again. Not because you need more glory, but because it's who you are. The storm doesn't sleep, the fire doesn't apologize, and the ones who change the game, in a way, no one will ever forget. They don't stop, they ignite.